Welcome back to 15th Street Automotive. Today's vehicle is a 2005 F250 with a 6-liter. Customer's concern is that it died while he was driving it, cranks and won't start. So we had to push it inside this morning. It cranks great, but there is it doesn't even attempt to start. There's no fire at all. So let's get started. Alright, so I scanned for codes. Ironically, there are no codes stored in it. The next thing to do is look at our engine data and see what we got going on there. So let's go into data display and we'll go into drivability. Alright, so since we don't want to look at all of these different things, so let's bring up the ones I like to look at. I like to see FICM M power. Oops, deselect all. FICM M power is a good one. I want to see what the fuel pressure is doing, so we're going to look at ICP pressure, and let's see what the regulator is doing. Let's look at IPR. I don't want that one. And let's see what ICP desired should be. So then we're going to graph those. Alright, so this pressure here, the injectors need 500 psi at ICP pressure to open up properly. This thing should be right around 20 to 24 or so, probably, with the engine running right. Alright, with the key on, engine off, we can see our fuel injection control module main power is 48 volts, right where we want to see it. We don't have any desired ICP or ICP because the engine's not cranking, and fuel pressure regulator is about 15. So let's crank it. Alright, as you can see, ICP pressure is barely climbing at all. Desired is 1500. And the IPR is almost maxed out. Good fuel control module, power voltage. So our problem is we're losing injector pressure control pressure. All right, so I've got a special tool here that I use on these 6-liters just for this exact problem. We've got a loss of high pressure oil pressure. It takes 500 psi of high pressure oil pressure to open the injectors. We're getting like 20. So either the high pressure oil pump is dead, or there's a leak in the system, or the pressure regulator is not doing its job, stuck open. So what we do, a little quick test, it's not quick, but I mean it's it's better than tearing the engine apart, is we have this little gadget here. This goes into the exact area that the IPR, you take the IPR out, stick this in the IPR, it's the shape of it is exactly the same as the IPR. Basically this is a block off for the IPR. But it also, once it's in there, you can introduce shop air to this fitting, open the valve here, and it will put shop air into the entire high pressure oil system. So if there's any leaks, you'll hear them. So what I do is I'll put it in there, I'll put air to this thing, let it sit there for 10 minutes while it pushes out any oil in the channels. If there's no air leaks, then I will close this valve off, unhook my hose, let it sit there for 10 minutes. When I open this valve, if there's still pressure on it, I know there's not a leak in the system. All that pressure would have bled off by then. So that's a good test for that. And then a second test, after you've determined that there's no leaks, you can also leave this hooked up with this closed, put the FICM back together, because FICM has to come off to do this thing. Put the FICM back in, attach some other lines, go crank it. If you then have high pressure oil pressure, you know your problem is the IPR, because all you're doing is substituting this for the IPR. So that's what we're going to do right now. I'll get some things apart on this thing so we can get access to it. I'll try and get the camera in there as close as I can, but it's pretty tight, so we'll see what we can do. Alright, so I've got some things out of the way here. I took the, let me get my light in here so we can see. Took the turbo tube off of there, the degas bottle out of there, air filter out right here. So I did some, gained some access here. I got the FICM loose, it's still attached in there. But so what we're looking for, what we're looking at is the IPR, light down there. So my IPR is right down in this hole here. So what we're looking for is the injector pressure regulator, and I'm going to zoom in here so you can kind of see where I'm going. Right next to the turbo. It's actually underneath the turbo. So if you can see that little silver cylinder down in there, right in the center of the screen, right there, is the injector pressure control regulator. So we're going to pull that thing out, and we're going to put that tool that I have in place of it. So I'll zoom back out so you can kind of see where it's at. So it's right in there underneath the turbo, and as you can see, we have all the other components removed already. So let's get this a few more things out of the way, and I'll get in there and get that tool put in there. Okay, so we got the FICM out of the way, and I took this harness out of the way. This is the harness I took out. This is the FICM connectors, and those are the fuel injector connectors. They mount right in there. So I took those out of the way, and you can see where this regulator is right there, right next to the turbo, right underneath the turbo. So that's what we're going to pull out, and then we'll put that bypass tool in there. So to get that IPR out of the way, to remove that IPR, it takes a tool like this. So it's a big cutout in there. Special tool. It's only used for the IPR. Got to have it, otherwise you'll damage that the electrical connector on it. So this is the tool we use to pull the IPR out with. Just a socket. I put it on a universal and a short extension. But the way this is the IPR right here. And the way it works is this slides on, makes room for the electrical connector, so you don't damage that electrical connector when you pull it off. So without this, it's next to impossible to get out. But as you can see, the IPR is shaped just like that tool I have. Basically, that tool just bypasses. These holes in here are how the IPR regulates oil pressure. The tool's solid, so that's why that's how that works. Okay, so we've got the tool in place of the IPR. I've got my shop air here. I'm going to add shop air to this, and then I'm going to open this valve up. So if this thing had a leak, I would hear air pressure blowing through here. I would be able to hear air pressure in the engine crankcase. I'm not hearing anything. So we let it sit here for a few minutes. It'll blow the oil out of the high pressure oil system, and then an air leak will develop. But I'm not hearing anything. So it's holding pressure. If it can't produce pressure and it's holding pressure, it's either a bad pump or it's a bad IPR. So let's leave this thing hooked up here. If we seal that off, now if we were to crank it with this bypass, IPR bypass installed, and we have oil pressure, high pressure oil pressure now, that tells us that the pump is good and that the IPR is likely faulty because we're taking the place of the IPR there. So let's go check out let's crank it, check out the readings of the injector pressure control right now, and see where we're at. Okay, so we verified that there's no leak in the system. It holds 110 psi of air. Held it for about 20 minutes without any loss. You open that valve after it sits for 20 minutes and it still has a ton of pressure on it. So there's no leaks in the high pressure oil system. So I've got that regulator, or the IPR cutoff adapter in there. So now if I am to crank this thing, I should get full injector control pressure, which is, 2,000 or 3,000 psi. I should be able to get that just cranking. So let's see what happens when I crank it. So you can see I got IPR is maxed out. ICP desired is 1500, and I've got 103 psi. Oh, we're starting to climb a little bit. Oh, here we go. We're getting a little bit. Yeah, we're not getting much. So that tells me my pump has probably died. So one thing I noticed when I pulled this IPR out of there is there's usually a cap on there, a screen cap on there, and what I found was this cap was still stuck in the pump housing. That's supposed to snap onto there, and it was still stuck in there, and the screen's blown out of it. So that tells me there's probably been some debris from that pump has gone through this thing. So more than likely we're looking at a pump. I got no leaks. I've got a questionable IPR, but with the IPR removed I still don't have any pressure, which tells me that pump is probably failed. So looks like this thing's getting a pump.